Good morning. I am Nadia Bettazzoli. I teach philosophy and history at the Liceo Scientifico Fermi in Cantù, Italy, where I am responsible for the project Education for Health and where I curate training courses for teachers. I am a psychologist and a psychotherapist professional, and since 2007 I am part of a bioethics non-profit organization in Milan, where I coordinate the school department. The main goal of this paper is to suggest a didactic model for teaching bioethics in high schools that articulates around a constructivist didactics, whose theoretical framework is the constructivist paradigm of knowledge that refers to the School of Palo Alto and to the socio-cultural constructivism, according to Varisco's perspective. The model activates the emotional and psychological components of the students that are particularly implicated in the teaching of bioethics for the existential themes of which it is responsible. The model relies on narrative didactics for the analysis of the emotional components. Philosophy is the disciplinary domain specifically considered to achieve the disciplinary and educational objectives related to the construction of ethical critic judgments. Philosophy is interdisciplinary connected to other knowledge domains, and in particular to biology, which is essential for the understanding of scientific contents from which critical judgments will be built. Bioethics allows to bring the students to the study of ethical philosophy, not in an abstract way, but through concrete ethical problems, facilitating the transition from meta-ethics to normative ethics. The connection between philosophy and bioethics is very tight and draws upon the ethical and existential nature of bioethical issues and dilemmas. Contents are related to the crucial issues of bioethics and concern restricted bioethics, that is a kind of bioethics related to the size of man, but some themes have also dealt with global bioethics. For what concerns the systemic theory of knowledge, it is here assumed that every phenomenon cannot be understood except in relation to the context in which it develops and interacts. Following Vaslovich's perspective, what we call reality, in fact, comes from our singular explanation of the world, built through communication and experience. Cognitive processes interact and are immersed in the context in which we live. The relationship between the subject and the context becomes then crucial, and the identification of the cognitive act becomes socially negotiated and shared. The co-construction of knowledge stems from the assumption that there are no absolute criteria in the investigation of reality, and that such criteria have limited validity in time and in history. The proposed model emphasizes the function of the group and draws ideas from cooperative learning with the aim of developing the students' relational and social skills. It is to highlight the civic and educational significance of the model. In fact, within cooperative learning, the system class becomes the foreshadowing of the future civil society, as well as a training place for social negotiation processes. Narrative teaching works on logical and cognitive skills, as well as on those skills related to narrative imagination. Narrative teaching, regardless on the different used technique, builds a teaching practice based on the action, from which the narration. The proposed narrative teaching encompasses, together with the listening to the other's stories, the first-person narration made by the students themselves. The narration of the self on the cognitive level takes place through oral expression, writing activities, and public presentation. On the expressive level, the narration is developed through dramatization. Particular attention has been given to the working mode of the theater forum, inspired by Ball's theater. This technique is a more effective and more comprehensive variation of the role-play technique and encourages the phase of catharsis and analysis. According to this technique, everyone, including the public, can perform, enabling the important participatory aspect of the model, thanks to which the theatrical simulation becomes a tool that enables new views of reality, overcoming the traditional passive role of the spectator. The simulation of reality, according to Batson, allows seeing the borders of the considered system by introducing boundaries, which are not real but built. Simulation focuses the attention on precise and circumscribed facts and events with which the individual establishes a direct relationship, both cognitively and emotionally, thanks to dramatization. I will describe now the five phases of the model, which includes both educational and disciplinary objectives. They correspond to the diverse moments of the cognitive process and clarify the related logic and argumentative steps of teaching bioethics. The first four phases proceed from a preliminary impact with the problem and through the first reflection, analysis, and synthesis reach the final stage of the critical judgment, which in the case of the teaching of bioethics is the ethical judgment. The fifth phase is participatory and involves the sharing of the learner knowledge with a broader audience. In the first phase, the encounter students team is the initial moment in which the teacher tries to stimulate the students' motivation, which is the wonder, according to the meaning given by Aristotle. The main goal of this phase is the transition from the emotion to the reflection and eventually to a first analysis. The presentation of the theme mainly takes place through narrative didactics, using movies, autobiographical text, and the direct first-person narration of the considered cases. For example, the case of Eluana Englaro was presented in a number of projects through Eluana's father's first-person narration. The case allowed the students to approach issues regarding the living will, in particular for what concerned the existential and legal aspects related to the long and painful legal battle led by Mr. Englaro. The students encounter disputes with the case and with the bioethical dilemma take place on an essentially emotional level. During the spontaneous discussion, students are encouraged to separate the rational level from the emotional level, which should not be denied but made aware. Issues at this point are still unsolved and formally synthesized with question marks. For example, when a human being dies, what is brain death, what is natural, what is artificial, and so on. In the next phase, students' misconceptions are Socratically questioned by the teacher, which assumes the role of the torpedo sea fish that numbs whatever touches, with the aim of leading the students to the awareness of not knowing, according to the Socratic method of irony. The main goals of this phase include overcoming the judgment of common sense, made students aware of not knowing, and question misconceptions. This stage sets boundaries to clarify on what the discussion is about. Bioethical issues, due to their interdisciplinary nature, bring with them many aspects of reflection, and therefore accurately defining since the beginning what to consider is a strictness key methodological procedure. The purification from the judgment of common sense takes place in respect of information and knowledge, often wrong, learned from the media, as well as in respect of cultural prejudice and emotions not mediated by reason. At this point, the process enters the stage of active construction, and each group of students establish what will be the terms and concepts to be properly defined. The journey toward knowledge begins now, assuming the philosophical image of the wanderer of Nietzsche that without dogmas face knowledge with critical and genealogical method. The main goal of this phase is the formulation of the ethical and critical judgment. On the cognitive level, the students come to the correct definition of terms and concepts. Scientific, philosophical, and legal texts, as well as newspaper articles and movies, are analyzed, and what is meant by critical ethical judgment is gradually learned. Ethics is addressed in its key aspects, such as the comparison between the utilitarian and deontological ethical perspectives, the absolute and prima facie prohibitions, the ethics of quality and sanctity of life. The wanderer continues the journey which will lead to the achievement of argumentation skills. To this end, students study the basic principles of rhetoric and argumentation. The fourth phase is based on the principle that the map, according to Bateson's powerful metaphor, is not the territory but its representation. At this stage, the transition to normative ethics occurs through the formulation of critical judgments and moral evaluations. The groups present their ethical and critical judgment to their classmates, because students draw now their ethical critical judgment on those bioethical questions that were first presented. This formulation should be presented as the result of an argument. During the discussion, students control the accuracy of the works that are eventually evaluated and self-evaluated. This is an important moment of synthesis aimed at creating educational principle with civic value. The ability to negotiate principle, criteria, different ideas, and to implement common procedure is promoted. The objective is to understand whether and how it is possible to find a common ground for the development of public ethics within the diversity of opinion which emerged. Following Engelhart's perspective, a feasible direction is that of constructivism, that is a conventional, secular, formal ethics, at the core of which is the respect for individual freedom. The last phase is dedicated to the sharing within a wider audience of what has been learned, emphasizing the dimension of socialization and creativity. Traditional tools used in this phase include the selection of some students' articles to be published, and the students present their work during local cultural events. On the narrative level, this phase shares with a broader audience also the theatrical performances that were performed within the class in the earlier phases. Novel tools include the use of Scratch, an online application developed by the lifelong kindergarten group at the MIT Media Lab. Scratch, enabling students to program their own interactive stories, games, and animation, and share their creations with others in the online community, fulfills the theoretical assumption of the proposed model, according to which knowledge is an open process of continuous co-construction. In fact, Scratch helps students learn to work collaboratively as its code is open source and then editable to create new projects. In conclusion, this model for teaching bioethics is framed within the theoretical framework of the constructivist theory of knowledge, developed in the secular dimension of learning and teaching. Bioethical dilemmas and their solution are addressed through the study of philosophy, which offers the founding categories of the rational thought for the construction of the critical and ethical judgment. In line with the sociocultural foundation of constructivism, the model emphasizes the role of the group. A great challenge for future society will be their ability to develop public ethics, and the school must take on the educational role of training future citizens, giving them those tools that are best suited in this sense. For example, the ability of co-construction, logical and critical thinking, participatory knowledge, perspective of secular thought, emphatic and civic skills. And that's all. Thank you very much.